Ask Reddit, how did the kid from your school die?
Of all things, an unfortunate camping accident. This was before cell phones. Two friends went out for the weekend to a campground for some fishing over the weekend. When they didn't arrive home at the time they said they would, the parents called the provincial park to see if they were running a bit late. The weather wasn't great and the camp was about an hour away from town, so it was entirely possible they decided to stay another night and drive out in the morning instead. The park warden stumbled upon their campsite and found both of them dead in their shared tent. Turns out it was a cool night and they decided to run a small heater in the tent to be warm, but it was an old heater that didn't have a shut-off sensor built in. The heater ran all night while they were asleep, and since they didn't open the flaps on their tent for air circulation, because they wanted to trap the heat, the tent filled with carbon monoxide and suffocated them in their sleep. So sad, and a week before school too. Playing along a fast-moving creek deep in the woods. First teen gets pulled under really fast. Second one immediately runs and dives in to find him. A minute later, first teen comes back up on the other side, exhausted but thankfully unhurt. Guy who went in to find him was not coming back up. Was in the days before cell phones. Had to run a good mile back up the trail, hop in the car, drive to the nearby park ranger office, East Texas Big Thicket area, and report/get help, along with guide rescuers. Took about 30 minutes total to get back out there to the accident. Still no sign of him. Rescue workers found that under the higher waters were tons of plant/tree debris everywhere. 2 days of removal while still trying to control fast-moving waters, his body was finally found. He had dived too deep trying to find the first friend, getting trapped under the submerged branches, without enough energy or breath to fight against the current to get out and back up. He was only 15. Grade 5. He was playing with his little brother when they found their dad's duty pistol. Little brother shot him right between the eyes. Can't imagine how the little brother feels. Was about 50 years ago. Group of kids got skunk drunk and decided to take a ride down a notoriously winding road. One guy was standing in the back of the truck and fell out as they rounded one of the hairpin curves. Didn't make it. There was the one kid in elementary school who was riding his bike and got hit by a car. The school's infinite wisdom was to reiterate the dangers of not wearing your helmet while riding a bike. Fantastic memorial. There was the guy who drunk drove into a pole to avoid a squirrel, as the surviving passengers put it. But the hardest one to think about was my kindergarten classmate. She survived, but her baby sister was killed in the Oklahoma City bombing. His girlfriend broke up with him. He didn't take it well. One afternoon after school, he walked down to the primary school near our high school and shot himself in the head right outside the entrance. Didn't know him well, but I don't think he had all that many friends. He always had sad eyes, but was very nice whenever someone spoke to him. An electrician screwed up rewiring her family's house so a live wire was touching a metal pipe connected to the bath. Her mom was wearing rubber work boots when she filled the bath so wasn't electrocuted, but she must have accidentally brushed against the tap or gone to add some more water while submerged and was dead instantly. We lived in a very small town where everyone knew each other, so it really rocked our community. She was in the grade above me, so would have been around 10 to 11. This one guy at my high school tried asking out this girl. The girl's brother and a group of his friends jumped him, did some unspeakable things to him, and the entire school found out about it. He was missing from school for months because he was in the hospital. Eventually, he came back to school, but people stared at him. It must have ate away at him because during the summer, his family went on a cruise and the guy jumped off the cruise ship and drowned. She was in the 5th grade and needed a blood transfusion. Her parents were Jehovah's Witnesses and refused the procedure. I don't know what condition she had, but she died due to lack of medical care. Try making sense of that at 11 years old. Massachusetts, 1995. In high school, a girl in the year ahead went missing. There were flyers posted for volunteers to help search for her. It was understood that she wasn't the type to run away. Her mom was out of her mind with worry. A few weeks later, her stepfather was arrested. It seems he'd sexually abused her, and then switched from her to her little sister. She threatened to tell, and he murdered her. Then he drove her body out somewhere to dump it, with her little sister in the car. She was too traumatized to remember much. Apparently, he put her body in a dumpster, and it ended up in a landfill somewhere. They got a confession out of the guy by putting him in Gen Pop and letting the other prisoners know what he was in for. He lasted less than 2 days. Her name was Debbie Moberg. One guy died on his birthday. He was getting chased by his friends for birthday beats, nothing really bad, just little roughhousing. So they are running around in the school all playfully, and he just collapsed and turned blue pretty quick. He apparently had some heart issue that he was unaware, and his heart just stopped. I believe he was like 15 or something. Super sad. Friend from high school died his freshman year of college at a fraternity hazing. The frat was already banned from having any events on campus. So the hazing ritual was done off campus at some house they rented off Airbnb. Guy was a good man, always nice to others, and had a great sense of humor. I don't think he had much experience with alcohol cause he turned blue after the hazing and was found unresponsive on a couch some time later. His frat decided to quietly drop him off to the hospital and left him there all alone. He died about 4 days later in the hospital. He was hooked onto a bunch of machines and sadly didn't recover. The alcohol had done irreparable damage to his liver. His parents sued the university, but the courts ended up ruling in favor of the school. Aside from the legal battle, his parents lost their youngest child. That's never easy to process. Almost 7 years later, and I still think about him from time to time. I wanted to attend his funeral, which was on a Friday, but I had a final exam for my German class and couldn't reschedule it without rescheduling my summer break traveling plans. I regret not attending the funeral. It would have given some sort of closure, being with friends and having time to just be in each other's company. In high school, I had a friend that had a troubled family life. He was living with foster parents and ran away back to his family on the reserve. They were First Nations, Cree specifically. He got picked up by our equivalent of CPS and was being transported back to his foster family's house in town. While on the highway, he jumped out of the car while it was traveling at a low speed. He got hit by another car in the oncoming lane going 100 kilometers per hour. Looking back on it, 20 years later, it is still painful. He was such a good guy. It breaks my heart to think of how much he missed his family and was willing to risk his life to go back to them, despite the abuse and drug use. He just didn't feel like he belonged in his foster family's house. They were decent people, just not his family. There was another kid I went to school with, but barely knew. She had a few disabilities and health issues. She passed from some kind of heart condition. He froze to death in his sleep after passing out in the snow. It was a school trip with his class, and they had some beers, but probably some of the first few times they tried alcohol. It was devastating. They were moving from one house to another, and he had said he needed a break in between, but everyone forgot or just thought he's in another house. It sounds like an obvious mistake, but it's not necessarily that cold even if it's snow, especially after a drink. To lie down and chill on a snow pile with a good jacket is no problem, but if you pass out and forgotten, well, damn. There was a boy from a family of alcoholics, parents divorced. He lived with a mom who was a very heavy drinker and a stepdad. Stepdad had a son who spent quite some time in mental facilities and rehab because he fed up his brain with drug use. The son eventually came home to live with his father and my classmate. One time the classmate accidentally saw his stepbrother sniffing glue from a bag. Stepbrother got mad, poured kerosene on him and lit him up. When his mother saw her child was burning, she jumped out the window and ran away while his younger siblings were trying to put out the fire. Unfortunately, once they managed to, he was already dead. Her parents publicly shamed her for her social media addiction by shaving all of her hair off and posting it on Facebook. She jumped out of her car, jumped off a bridge, onto a freeway where she landed on a truck and died some 4 hours later of her injuries. She was 13. I had a few people. But the one I wasn't particularly attached to, as in we weren't friends and did not know each other too well, was a guy who had just graduated. We'll call him Jack. I knew Jack through our study hall that year. We didn't talk much, and didn't have much in common, but he seemed like an alright guy. Jack was known to be a respectable and decent person outside of school, and he got very popular because he was always throwing parties or attending them. About a week after graduation, Jack and another graduate, we'll call him Steve, were going to a lot of parties to celebrate. Jack and Steve were very close and spent a lot of time together and would frequently go to these sort of things together. One night, they decided to go across the bay to a party, and drove there with the intention to get hammered and grab a ride home because they didn't want to drive wasted. The night goes on and people are getting F up. This was when Four Loko was the drink of choice because you got demolished drinking them. The challenge that night was to chug them and take a bong hit. So naturally, a lot of people got 2 F up and were down for the count. Jack and Steve got really F up, but remembered they had to get back to Jack's house. So Jack and Steve decide to borrow a canoe from the person hosting the party, and begin to paddle out over the bay in the middle of the night without any lights or vests. Jack and Steve make most of the trip, but when approaching the shoreline, things get a little rough. Jack and Steve are drunk, and when coming in, the canoe gets unbalanced, then tips. Jack falls in, and Steve does too. Steve begins swimming away from the canoe and gets on land, but Jack never made it. The police think that because it was so dark, that Jack couldn't find his way to the shoreline, and because the water was kinda rough for a canoe, he was probably tired from rowing up until it tipped. Further, they believed that because he couldn't see, he swam around before exhausting all of his energy, eventually drowning. They found his body about 100 meters out in the water, and it drifted from where they tipped. Later, it came out that Steve just went home when he made it to shore. Steve never phoned the police. When police began their investigation, they wondered why a kid would row out on a canoe by himself, and were trying to find more details. Steve's parents told the police that Steve was with Jack the night he died. Steve was charged for leaving the scene of a fatal boating accident that led to the death of his friend, but had the second charge dropped, which was reckless operation of a boating vessel. Steve and Jack were friends for 10 years before Jack died. Steve moved out of town, and no one ever spoke to him again. Thank you for watching, friend. Until next time, and remember to stay hydrated.